big narratives, colonization, hunger and poverty, civil rights, social justice, but we use an Irish context. We tell the Irish story. And you see the eureka moment happen, and then suddenly, oh my goodness, that sounds like what I know. And then respect for tradition, folklore and mythology. But it's a wonderful arc to connect students, and it also gives them an authenticity, a validity of loving who they are, their identity and their ethnicity. And then cultural competency, just being able to move around the world. And this is where their professional self comes in. So they go for a job, they want to maybe work as a nurse in Europe for a while. They have that confidence, that belief that they can move around the world and that they can learn. Your customs and traditions are lovely here. When you go to Japan or you go to France or you go to New York, something else comes into play, and it can be a little daunting. You don't want to do the wrong thing. You don't want to make that one gesture that means, you know, I wish you dragons for breakfast. So, and particularly where they're more old traditions. Our students say to us all the time, is there anything that you might say in Ireland that would be considered rude? But what I'm saying is, before anybody goes anywhere, this should be thought about as an educational project and something that's taken as seriously as any other course of studies, right up to PhD. From a pedagogical point of view, you know, how best to deliver that. There's a lot of study programs that are just almost what I would call hit and miss. If you're lucky and people are in the right place at the right time, this might be delivered, but you can't be sure. And particularly study abroad programs that aren't supervised or that aren't faculty led. I mean, how do you know? It's hard enough. We have the wonderful Deb, who is just our stalwart ambassador here. And she brought us here today, but if John and I had to make it here today, God knows where we would be. So knowing how to move around is important. You need a faculty leader. You also need someone on the ground. So you need to have a pedagogy. You need to have a methodology. And I think that ours is the shared narrative. So we have an island in the middle of the Atlantic, you have islands here in the Pacific. We both have ancient indigenous cultures and traditions and folklore that are still very much alive. So really what we're going to work with people from Hawaii is what they know and what we know, and again create that arc. The reason that it works is number one, it's familiar. That there is something, it's not the whole story, but there are little bits that you can start to knit connections and then you build on that, and that's the first thing. Students are interested. They can't believe there's a surf culture in, you know, North Atlantic Ireland. They are surprised by the diversity in Ireland now. It used to be a very white country, but now there's so much more diversity because we are welcoming refugees and visitors from all around the world. So we have an Irish African community, we have a Brazilian community. So there are lots of little surprises along the way that people didn't expect. But the thing about it is that it is familiar. After that, what happens is that you're dealing with narratives. We have conversations with people from Hawaii. We're talking about colonization. We're talking about oppression. We're talking about a native language. We're talking about customs and traditions. However, there is a safe space created when you're talking about somebody else. Okay? So when we're talking, if I started to talk about things that are very close to us, like Northern Ireland, for example, there are labels and triggers and familiar little niches that we've been sitting in so long that we almost can't escape the gut reaction. So, you know, if somebody makes a joke about the British or whatever, we're absolutely forced as Irish people to make a joke. It's just, we have to. And, you know, there's other ways in which we're kind of predisposed because of our experiences to think or feel a different way, or to be triggered. And in the United States at the moment, and you know, I don't ever consider Hawaii as typical of the United States, and certainly, you know, we work with colleges, let's say, in big Republican areas like Nebraska or Kansas, where they are really at odds about, say, Trump versus the Democrats. And you can't, the minute you say the word, people are stiffened by either waiting to be validated or waiting to be offended. And that is just a default condition at the moment. I mean, people are polarized. And it used to be like that in Northern Ireland. You say Protestant Catholic, you say, you know, loyalist, unionist, and immediately are forced into a position. Now, if you're dealing with someone else's narratives and you don't really know what the positions are, then it's a much safer space to have conversations, maybe about colonisation, maybe about indigenous languages, maybe about who's accepted and who's not. Maybe you're talking about identity. Do you measure it by DNA? Is there a blood count that you have to belong? But when you take it away, it's almost like somebody opening up a garden space where you can skip around and think about things and not be triggered. And very often the conclusions that are made in this safe space are different to the typical ones, and you can bring them back to where you came from, and that's where you have the critical thinking. That's where you might have a shift. So what we do is we talk about those big narratives: colonization, hunger and poverty, civil rights, social justice, but we use an Irish context. We tell the Irish story, and then we let people, and you see the eureka moment happen. Okay, you don't cultivate it, but you just kind of throw all the breadcrumbs out, and then suddenly, oh my goodness, that sounds like what I know. And then the students will do the rest, their own brains will do the rest. Thankfully, a lot of the outcomes of the Irish story, yes, we were colonised, we were divided, we had borders, we almost lost our language, all of that is true. We used to be a very conservative country with a difficult story. That has been resolved. Thankfully, I can come here and say that to you, that we are a much more progressive, kinder, liberal country in the 21st century than we were in the 20th century. When we were growing up, that we had a real problems, politically, economically, socially, culturally, in terms of women, and a lot of that has been moved on by the activism of our young people. That's really what's done it. So when you've got a happy ending to share with people, it gives hope and confidence. And that's been a big part of the work we've been doing in the last few years. When somebody has specific area of pride, whether it's ethnic, whether it's gender-based or whatever, meeting other people who are celebrating the same thing gives you courage, gives you confidence. That's why in some ways the internet has been a great blessing for people to kind of find their tribes. We couldn't tell you how many people have come to Ireland and said that they felt at home here. And we had a lovely member of the, what's the tribe that came from Arizona? Sylvia's tribe. Yaqui. And he said it was the first time that he felt like a fully recognized human being because he was away with other people. And of course everybody was so interested in his traditions. So that kind of solidarity and pride that you can get from an internationalization experience really matters. I could definitely rant and rave about how great Ireland is and all our connections, but this is a college and I want to put it in that perspective of a learning experience, a meaningful learning experience. But the older I get, and I never stop hoping that I'm learning, is our language. It's just got everything built into it. Yeah. And in Gaelic, the Gaelic language is one of the oldest languages. It's an Indo-European language and it's thousands of years old. And we can't exactly pinpoint when it began to be spoken because for thousands of years nothing was written down. And I was reading a little bit about Hawaiian language and they seem to have very similar roots in that it was taboo for the storytellers to give themselves any kind of written clues. It was all about memorizing and building in all your little cliffhangers so that you could repeat and the oral tradition would go down. And that is called Béal Iges in Irish. Béal is your mouth and Iges is education or knowledge. So Béal Iges is the knowledge of the storyteller. And that is crucial in Irish culture, that stories are told and you have the storyteller is the Shanachie and the poet. So those people who deliver the culture again and again and again are crucial to the tradition. And in Gaelic. And then the other element of that, you have this folkloric knowledge, but Din Shanachas is the lore of place. So you kindly explained why this has its name, and the coconuts and the river. Everywhere in Gaelic Ireland is explained by its name. So we have popular words like Kill, C-I-L-L, is a church. If you see somewhere that's called Kill anything, it's got a church there. And it'll be an old church, like an early church, like 5th or 6th century. So Kilkenny, Kildare, these Irish place names, you can unpack it and that will tell you exactly what was going on there. Obviously, as we were colonized, our country was renamed. And the renaming kills the story. And this is a colonial objective to take our meaning away from us. So when we revive that culture, we must reclaim the original names and we must get people to use the names and understand what they are. So colonisation, displacement, very briefly, Ireland was colonised in the 17th century, so the land was taken away from the native people and given to English and Scottish nobles as a reward for electioneering. And first of all, the ownership of the land was taken, and then the people themselves were moved to the very west extremes of Ireland where the land was bad. And Scots farmers were given a lot of our land. We got it back bit by bit, very slowly, but in the meantime, many people emigrated here to the United States, both the Scots and the Indigenous, and that's Irish America, which is a very powerful diaspora. But the displacement of the language, of the customs, of the traditions is something that we could stay here all day and talk about. Civil rights and social justice. The civil rights movement in the north of Ireland, within those counties, is exactly based on the civil rights movement in the United States, in the South. So when the people of Northern Ireland saw what Dr. King was doing, they absolutely set up a committee to copy, to do exactly what he was doing because they saw its effectiveness. So it's a very interesting study, particularly for African American students, to see that one movement has such a direct effect on another movement. So one of the major elements of Irish folklore are the Sidhe. And the Sidhe, we'll call them fairies, but they're not fairy sounds like Tinkerbell and Disney. That's not who they are. The Sidhe are the people of the mounds. And the origin story of the Sidhe is that there were various invasions of different people into Ireland. And one of them was the Tuatha De Danann, or the people of the god Dana. And these were little supernatural people. And they could shapeshift and they could punish people for any evil deeds that they did. Kind of malevolent little creatures, and you didn't mess with them. And they could also reward you if you did good things. And it's very interesting when you look at it, because the people that they tend to protect, these little Sidhe, are the people on the margins of society, like elderly people or children. So it's almost like a built-in way of social welfare, these Sidhe people, these fairy folk. And the story is that when humans came, there was a war between the Sidhe and the humans. And the Sidhe lost the battle, which meant that they had to disappear into nature. So they live in the undergrowth, they live in the rivers, they live in the waterfalls and the caves and under the rainbows. But their job is as protectors of the environment. And if you mess with the environment, you will get an environmental punishment. And to this day, you know, there are places in Ireland, hundreds of thousands of places, that are associated with them, particularly the blackthorn tree, fairy paths. Do not mess with them. You cut them down at your peril, and people won't do it. And if you Google this, you will find that a few years ago, the Irish government planned to drive a road, to build a new road to the airport. And in the end, there were so many objections because they were going through a fairy path. And the letter was in the New York Times, and it was like, oh, look at those mad Irish, woo-woo Irish, you know. But the point about it is there are stories, and if you bulldoze that down, it's not there for the next generation. And also, the more I look at it now, I see that there is something in tradition that was always protecting the water and the air, and you know, knew which plants we needed. And now we're having this whole environmental revolution where everybody is talking about going green, and it's been there forever. You know, and the people knew in terms of both looking after the environment and themselves, spiritually, mentally, in terms of healthcare. Everything was there in the traditions and the customs. So I think, thankfully, a lot of people are looking back that way at it now. So you feel like you're on the crest of a wave, and people are really open in ways that they mightn't have been, you know, at the sort of height of capitalism. Everything was all about the money. And maybe it was COVID, I don't know, but we seem to be in a more generous space for being open to those things. So that's what I wanted to tell you as, say, the narratives. When we get into that, we spend a week or 2 weeks, or we do online courses as well, but bringing the students around, showing them all of these stories. We usually start at the Stone Age, as I was saying to you, that our structures have alignment, solstice and equinox, and then moving on from Stone Age to Bronze Age to Celtic to early Christian, Vikings, the Normans, the British, our Irish American diaspora. So there are kind of stages that we go through, and by the time we finish up, we have brought the students on our journey, but at every stage they have jumped in and connected it to their journey, and hopefully end up then with these aspirations of more discovery. Very quietly, because I don't let them get a word in edgeways. Also, if you'd like to hear some other voice, please, you can ask John as well.